Not every chain comes from the devil. Some are forged by the very blessings you prayed for. You asked for provision, and God gave you tests disguised as money. Because the traps of heaven don't look like punishment. They look like opportunities that slowly replace your faith with control. And today, we're going to expose the 7 divine money traps that God Himself allows, to see if you still depend on Him, or on what's in your account. You prayed for God to provide, and He did. But what you didn't see is that provision can become the most beautiful prison. Because the moment you received what you asked for, you stopped asking why you needed it. That's how the first trap is set, not with temptation, but with answers. God gives you comfort, and the system turns it into currency. He gives you peace, and the system turns it into performance. The blessing becomes a brand. The miracle becomes maintenance. And before you realize it, you're no longer praying for God. You're praying for consistency. You say, "Thank you, Lord," but what you really mean is, "Don't take it away." Because now your faith isn't in God's hand. It's in your paycheck. You used to wake up grateful. Now you wake up anxious. You used to see daily bread as grace. Now it's an expectation with a deadline. That's the genius of this trap. It doesn't make you greedy. It makes you dependent. Not on God, but on the system that controls His blessings. Because money isn't evil. Dependence is. The kind of dependence that makes you believe that losing provision means losing purpose. And when that belief takes root, you'll start calling slavery security. You'll start confusing faithfulness with fear. You'll stop serving God and start serving stability. That's the first money trap, the illusion that provision is protection. When in truth, it's just the first test to see whether you'll love the gift more than the giver. The second trap is more dangerous because it doesn't come wrapped in temptation. It comes disguised as reward. You begged for opportunity, and God opened a door. But the system was waiting on the other side, ready to turn your purpose into performance. You told yourself it was blessing, but blessings don't drain you. They don't steal your peace while you're trying to protect them. You worked hard, you prayed harder, and when success finally came, you stopped asking if it still belonged to God. Because here's the secret the system never tells you. It doesn't need your money, it needs your momentum. If it can keep you chasing, it can keep you distracted. And the easiest way to make you forget heaven is to convince you you're winning on earth. You started measuring your worth in progress, not presence. You called exhaustion dedication. You called stress stewardship. You baptized ambition and called it faith. But somewhere between gratitude and greed, you lost the silence where God used to speak. You see, the system doesn't punish believers. It promotes them until they start worshiping the results of their prayers. That's when success becomes sacred, not because it's holy, but because you've built an altar around it. You no longer ask, "What does God want?" You ask, "What's next?" You no longer seek peace. You schedule it. And when peace becomes something you have to earn, you've already lost it. That's the second money trap, the trap of success. The moment when the system no longer has to tempt you because your blessing does the work for it. The third trap isn't about gain. It's about governance. Because once the system gives you comfort and success, it doesn't need to tempt you anymore. It just needs to guide you. And it does that through control disguised as choice. You think you're deciding where your money goes, but your money already decided where you'll go. Every goal, every dream, every plan starts orbiting around what you can afford. You stopped asking what God wants and started asking what fits your budget. You don't move by faith anymore. You move by fear of loss. That's the invisible leash of control. You don't feel it tighten. You just stop walking in directions that don't feel safe. And here's the cruel part. The system doesn't need to take your freedom. It just needs to convince you that comfort is freedom. You begin to mistake permission for blessing, stability for peace, and control for stewardship. The moment you believe that your worth lives in your wallet, you'll start negotiating your obedience. You'll say, "God, I'll follow you. Just don't touch this job. God, I'll trust you. Just don't test this account. God, I'll give everything, except what gives me control." That's when faith becomes a contract. And the system smiles, because the believer who needs to understand before obeying has already been bought. The more you try to manage every outcome, the less room you leave for miracles. Because miracles don't grow in managed soil. That's the third trap, the illusion of control. where you stop being led by God and start leading yourself in His name. The fourth trap isn't financial, it's spiritual. Because debt doesn't begin on paper, it begins in the mind. The moment you start believing you owe your peace to your paycheck, your joy to your job, or your future to your credit score, you're already enslaved. The system calls it responsibility, but heaven calls it bondage. It doesn't chain your hands, it chains your hope. It convinces you that everything you own was never truly yours. So you keep running, not toward abundance, but away from fear. Fear of losing, fear of lacking, fear of letting go. Debt is the system's masterpiece, because it doesn't need to punish you. It just needs to make you tired enough to stop dreaming. You work for numbers you'll never see, to pay for things you don't remember wanting, to impress people who don't even notice. That's not economy, that's worship. The borrower is slave to the lender, but in this age, the lender doesn't have a name. It's not a man, it's a mindset. It's that quiet whisper that says, you can rest when you earn it. You can give when you have more. You can trust when it makes sense. But faith doesn't wait for logic, and debt is the slow death of faith. Because every time you pray for a miracle, but live like you're owned, you're confessing that the system still has your soul on lease. That's why the system loves debt. It keeps believers working hard enough to survive, but never free enough to surrender. You can't serve two masters, but the system found a loophole. It made you believe that the master who feeds you can't possibly be the one who's feeding on you. That's the fourth money trap, the illusion that debt is discipline, when in truth, it's devotion to the wrong kingdom. Fear is the currency the system trusts most, because when it can't buy you with money, it buys you with anxiety. You think fear only lives in failure, but fear also hides in success, in the what if I lose it that whispers after every win. You say you trust God, but every plan you make is built around avoiding loss. You pray for abundance, then protect your scarcity like it's sacred. That's how the system keeps you obedient. It doesn't threaten you. It convinces you that risk is rebellion. And here's the cruel truth. Fear doesn't stop your blessings. It just makes you too cautious to receive them. You tithe, you pray, you speak of faith, but deep down, you treat every miracle like a loan you'll have to repay. That's not faith. That's fear wearing religion's clothes. Because when fear rules your finances, you stop being generous, you stop being present, you stop moving, and that's exactly where the system wants you, frozen between gratitude and guilt, working hard enough to survive, but scared enough to never escape. Fear is not the opposite of faith, it's its counterfeit. It feels holy because it's cautious, it feels wise because it's safe. But faith was never meant to feel safe. Faith asks you to walk when the math doesn't work. Fear tells you to wait until it does. And the more you wait, the more your courage decays under the weight of logic. That's the fifth money trap, the illusion of wisdom that fear disguises as faith. Because the system knows, a believer who prays but never risks is already under control. The sixth trap doesn't steal your money, it steals your peace. Because the system learned something God never needed to. How to weaponize what you see. It doesn't tempt you with sin. It tempts you with someone else's success. It shows you blessings that look like yours, but arrive sooner, shine brighter, and make you question if God still remembers your name. You scroll through other people's miracles and start doubting your own. You don't even realize it, but your worship turns into wish lists. You call it motivation, but heaven calls it comparison dressed as devotion. You used to thank God for what you had. Now you ask why He gave someone else more. And that's exactly how the system wins, by making gratitude feel like failure. Because when you start measuring your blessings against theirs, you stop seeing the divine in your own delays. Comparison doesn't just make you jealous, it makes you blind. You can't see the miracle you're living in because you're staring at the one you're missing. And that blindness has a cost. You start chasing what was never meant for you, praying for purposes that don't fit your soul, and trading peace for performance. Again, the system feeds on this insecurity. Every scroll, every like, every glance teaches you to crave validation more than vision. You start confusing applause with alignment, and slowly you stop walking with God and start posing with Him. That's the sixth money trap, the illusion that success is a scoreboard. Because the moment you start keeping score, you stop keeping faith. And the system doesn't need to steal your blessing. It just needs to convince you that someone else's blessing means you lost. The last trap doesn't hurt. That's why it's perfect. Because pain wakes you up. But comfort makes you sleep with your eyes open. The system doesn't need to break you anymore. It just needs to bless you, enough to keep you quiet. You stop praying out of hunger and start praying out of habit. You stop seeking revelation and start recycling routines. And little by little, the fire that once burned in you turns into a candle you light on Sundays. That's how the system wins. Not by persecution, but by permission. It gives you comfort that feels holy, bills paid, health stable, plans safe, and in that false peace, you forget the very reason you were called, to grow, not to settle. Because true faith doesn't end in security. It begins where security ends. But the system knows you fear the unknown. So it builds a life so good you'll never risk reaching for better. It doesn't need to make you sin, just satisfied. It doesn't need to make you doubt, just distracted. And soon, you confuse peace with pause. You start thinking stillness means success, when sometimes it's just spiritual sedation. That's the final trap, the one even the faithful rarely escape. The illusion that comfort is blessing. Because God's goal was never to keep you comfortable. It was to keep you conscious. And the moment you mistake comfort for calling, you stop hearing the voice that once shook your world. The system smiles when you rest in routine. Because it knows, a quiet believer is easier to control than a courageous one. So maybe what you call peace isn't peace at all. Maybe it's the softest chain you've ever worn. And until you break it, you'll never know what true freedom feels like. So now you see it. The system never needed to take your faith. It just needed to make you comfortable enough to stop using it. Because comfort is the most beautiful prison, and the hardest one to escape. You thought you were blessed, but maybe you were just being bought. Every stable job, every safe plan, every secure routine, a chain polished to look like peace. And while you thank God for your calm, the system thanks you for your silence. But there's something the system still fears: awareness. Because once you see the cage, you can never sit in it the same way again. So ask yourself, have you really found peace, or just stopped fighting for purpose? Tell me in the comments, which trap did you recognize yourself in first? Because awareness is rebellion, and the moment you name your trap, you've already started breaking it. Stay until the end of the next message, because we're not done. If this video showed you how God tests your dependence, the next one will reveal how the system rewards your distraction.